Hey everybody, this is Andrew from 100 Days Away Family Travel Blog. And today I just wanted to go into a bit of a deep dive on the Google spreadsheet that we use to plan our family sabbatical. And we get quite a lot of questions on Reddit and other forums that we're on about what we use to plan and if we used apps or software. And honestly, all we used was a Google spreadsheet. We found it really convenient to have on our laptops. We can even have the app on our phone. It's, of course, free, which is great. And it meant we could have all the information in one place. So that's itinerary information, booking information, budget, and cost information. I also happen to love spreadsheets, so there's that. But um, anyway, so I thought it'd be useful just to kind of run through this spreadsheet, explain how each of the tabs work, and you can decide if this is something that you'd find useful for planning your own trip. It's completely free. Just visit our website. You can get a link to this, and you can go ahead and make a copy and start editing it for your own trip. So the first tab is the location selector tab. And this is a really important tab within the sheet. And that's because all of the different tabs along the bottom, and you'll see there are quite a few, they all pull drop down menu information from this location selector tab. So you'll notice the countries, the location information, everything here is pulled from this sheet. And it's the same for the hotels page, the flights page, the daily cost page. Pretty much all of these sheets have these little drop down arrows. So it's really important that you get this information correct. Of course, if partway through your planning travels, you want to add in an extra country or an extra location, you absolutely can. There's no problems with doing that. But I would suggest putting in all of the places that you think you might go to. And if you decide to not go to them, it's going to be easier to manage it afterwards. So in terms of this tab, you'll see along the top in row 2 in the green highlight, this is where you put all the different countries that you're planning on going on your trip. And you'll notice I've put in the countries we went to, but there is more capacity in the spreadsheet than just what we did. There's actually up to 20 different countries if you kind of look at all these different blanks along the top. And then within each country, you have up to 30 different cities, towns, places that you can add in there. So I would say in general, it should cover most people's travel plans. Now, if you were traveling, for example, for 2 years across Asia and Europe, you might visit more than 20 countries. Perhaps if you were doing a year-long road trip in the US, you might visit more than 30 cities, depending on how fast you travel. So if that's the case for either of those two scenarios, I am super jealous. It sounds amazing, but happy for you to send me either a message through the website or leave a comment below, and I'm more than happy to add in some extra columns or rows to make the spreadsheet work for you. Okay, so the next tab is the trip itinerary tab. And I've actually flipped spreadsheets here to the exact spreadsheet I used for the trip. And you'll notice we've got everything from the initial flight and sleeping on the plane all the way through Japan, China, Vietnam, right down into New Zealand. And you'll see that, the main purpose of this tab is really to have a calendar view almost that can be adjusted on the fly to, get a visualization of how your trip is looking. And, especially when we're in New Zealand, this was very, very obvious. We were doing a lot of traveling, a lot of 1 night, 2 night stops. And I think being able to see that is very useful in the planning stage. And when you've got longer durations, it's very, very helpful. But anyway, I'm going to flip back to my example spreadsheet just so I can start from scratch to show you how to use this. The first thing that you would do is you would add in your trip start year. I'm going to go from 2026, and my start date is going to be the 2nd of February 26. Now, I'm going to do the same example is when we actually flew and we were on a plane for the first night. So I'm going to do that. Then we went to Japan for a few nights in different locations. So we're going to add in Kyoto, Tokyo, Osaka. This is exactly what we did actually. We're going to go to China. We're going to go to Vietnam, Malaysia, Cambodia. And you can see how quick and easy it is to actually fill this out once you get used to the spreadsheet. Siem Reap. We're going to go Thailand. We're going to go Thailand again. We're going to go to Bangkok, and we're going to go to Chiang Rai instead. Australia, and then New Zealand. Okay. Arthur's Pass and Brisbane. Okay, so these are just some random dates here. This is not the trip we did exactly. It's kind of roughly based on it. But what you'll see is that it's starting to show this kind of cascading calendar. And as I mentioned before, we use this really for visualizing our trip and when we were going to get back. And I'll flick back over to the exact spreadsheet we used. And the really important piece for us was when we were going to arrive home. And that was because, we really wanted to be back in school for this first week. I guess technically the second week back at school. So we were constantly adjusting these duration dates here, adjusting the places we were going to. And if, for example, you decided you didn't want to go to Chiang Rai anymore, then you can just put 0. It will still work and it will just blank out that line. Don't delete the line, just put 0 and it will just skip it. You could say, what, I'm not even going to go to Thailand anymore, and it would adjust those dates. So anyway, hopefully that explains how to use this sheet. It's fairly straightforward. We do have 2 years of capacity on here. It's not even necessarily something you have to use in the spreadsheet. It's just, I think, a useful tool to visualize where you're going to be, how much you're traveling, when you're going to get back, and not have to worry about adding all this information into an app. Everything's driven off the same information. So next up, I'm going to show you the hotel tab. Okay, so in the hotel tab, the information is split into a few different sections. So the first one is really just information about the place that you're visiting, the dates, and the hotel that you're looking at booking. You might not at this point even know what that hotel is. You can just put a random hotel or leave it blank. You then have the budget information, and you can choose cost per day here. So if, for example, I know that I'm going to have 2 nights here, $200 a day, I can adjust as needed. All of the sum of all of these, it's going to sum up into the yellow cells throughout pretty much all of these tabs that I'll be showing you. And if you've gone past the budget stage and you're actually starting to book hotels, then you can actually start to fill this out. And you can select yes. If you select yes, it goes green. If you select no, it stays white. So you can know just by looking over here which ones you still need to book and which ones have been booked, so you know which ones to focus on. Then you can put in the date you booked the hotel, the booking reference, the portal, so that might be the hotel website, booking.com, Expedia. You would also have information on whether you can cancel for free. That, by the way, is one of the biggest things you want to look for when you're booking a hotel. It's so important, especially when you're booking a year in advance or 6 months in advance. You want to have the flexibility to change plans if things go wrong. We had this with Vietnam. There was flooding in Hoi An, and we had to kind of pivot fairly quickly to Malaysia. But by the fact that we'd booked either redemptions that we could cancel a day before, or through booking.com, Expedia, we had free cancellation, and it made adjusting our plans so easy. So really don't overlook that. If you can at all help it, make sure you get a free cancellation date. And then it goes into payment details. So in column T, you will put the total cost. You'll notice this might be different to what the budget is. That's absolutely fine. You can select either paid in full, deposit paid, pay later, or pay on checkout. And if you have paid, you would put the date, the credit card, and the amount you've paid. So as an example, if I've $100 cost here, I've deposit paid, I've only paid $60, then it will tell me up here I still have to pay a certain amount. Likewise, if this was 2,000 and I pay on checkout, just say this is all the same information, but I paid zero. So it's going to carry through. I still have to pay $2,000. And that's useful because, when you're in the middle of booking and you've made lots of hotel bookings, lots of flight bookings, big attractions like Disneyland, it's useful to be able to look very quickly, how much more money do I have to spend before I set off? Because a lot of these will be paid before you set off, or at least committed to be paid before you set off. On the right hand side, just comments by line. You can put really whatever you like in there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And one thing I will show you is from the trip itinerary page, you can actually copy and then paste. And I've actually using a previous example here, but in that particular example, it's actually copied across exactly what we had, which is really handy if you want to replicate that easily and quickly, because it can take a while to fill out all the different sections. And yeah, hopefully you found that useful. I'm going to just quickly whiz through the flights, major transportation and attractions tab, and daily costs. They all work fairly similarly, to be honest. The flights, you select the country of departure, departure city, arrival city, the time you set off, airline, all of that sort of information around the flight. You can put in budgetary costs for the flight, and also if there's bag costs, any extras that you need to factor in. And then the same as the hotel tab, you have whether it's booked, it will highlight green over here, booking dates, reference. We wanted to put in the departure airport time, arrival time, just so we can quickly look rather than having to dig through our emails, find one of about 1,000 emails from WestJet. And then same information with booking. For the most part, flights are paid for in full at time of booking. So most of them would be in full. You just put the paid date, credit cards, and the amount. One thing to consider putting in the comments are things like perhaps the trip cancellation benefits you might get with your credit card, flight cancellation, if they lose a bag, things like that. It's worth keeping a very clear, making it very clear which credit card you've booked with, because the amount of times, I'm delayed so many hours, and I've actually done it twice, once in Toronto, once in Amsterdam, where we had to go into town and find a hotel, and it was very easy to find who we were flying with, and Amex actually paid for our hotel on both occasions. So it's well worth keeping a record of who you've booked with and what benefits they give you. Moving on to the major transportation tab. Again, same idea. This is for things like the major transportation. So not flights, because that's covered in here, but things like major trains, like the Shinkansen in Japan, the slow boat in Luang Prabang, a major like taxi boat that we had to get in Milford Sound, the cruise down there, things like that. So if it's day-to-day taxis and things, that will fall under the daily cost. This is really your big ticket internal travel that you want to factor in and probably book ahead. So again, it's the same drop downs at the start: travel company, mode, class, duration. You estimate what you're going to spend on the cost, and then you the same format, fill out all the information working left to right, and the same comments. So what I will say is the budget cost does all roll up from all of these different tabs into this budget summary sheet, which I'll talk about in a little bit here. We also have a spend analysis tab, which also kind of factors in whether you've spent any of the budgetary items yet or not. So it is worth filling this out. And if you go ahead and book something, and then you go ahead and say you've paid for something over here, it won't factor this in. You know, it's a budget, and it will factor the budget until it has an actual. And then at the point it has an actual, the budget kind of disappears in the calculations. So attractions, I don't think I really need to talk about this, but this is the same idea. It's big things. It's Universal Studios. It's Disneyland. It's Hobbiton in New Zealand. Things like that that are going to be fairly expensive. You might want to book ahead. You probably want to plan and budget for that cost. But again, same information. And then the final one is the daily costs. So the daily cost works in the same way. What it actually does is it automatically pulls through everything from the trip itinerary, and then you can go through and start picking and choosing how much per day for food, transportation, gas, and activities. So in this example, on a flight, we're not going to be spending anything on transport, gas, or activities. We might buy something at the airport. You know, when we're in Tokyo, we probably have, say $100 for food a day, maybe some, tube local trains on for transportation. We're not hiring a car, so there would be zero in gas, and we probably spend $50 a day on, museum entries, temples, things like that. And you would go through. I'm just going to drag and drop this just for simplicity, but you would go through and you would be specific to each one. So maybe in CM Reap, you might be able to get away with a less amount of money for food, but in Australia maybe it's $200. And what it will do is it will just multiply out the daily cost by the number of days on your itinerary for each location, and it will sum it up top here. So you'll see the daily budget total for the trip that we have, which is currently 42 days, would be 5,000 based on the information I've just quickly thrown in here. So hopefully this explains how this all works. I'm now going to go into the budget summary. I'm just going to quickly fill out some of this information so it all runs through nicely. Okay, so I made a few adjustments, and this is the budget summary tab. And it's a fairly straightforward sheet. What it does is it sums up all of the budgetary information that you've entered it through the hotel tab, flights, major transportation, etc., as well as the daily costs. So you can start to get a full picture of how much this trip might actually cost you, which is probably the biggest factor for almost every single trip that we ever take anyway. So it's really, really important. Um, what it does is it also can divide it up by either category or by country. So you'll notice here in this very fake example, flights are just $1,000, hotels seven, and this is how it's been categorized throughout these tabs. Now, in our specific example, flights were well over 10 grand. It was quite significant for us. But what it does is, I guess, at a highlight, it will tell you where you're spending your money. So in hotels, maybe I'd look at this and say, 1,300 is quite good for Japan, but Cambodia, $1,000 seems expensive. So it would give me somewhere to go in and start to look at the hotel I've booked. Maybe I can reduce the price. Is $200 a night really realistic in Cambodia or not? Um, so this is, I guess, the overall budget for the trip. Um, you can also work out kind of your cost per day. This row here in row 13 does include the flight costs. So if you want to exclude the flight costs, then you can use this column, and that will just add up any of these costs basically. So all of these costs for each country, and then divided by the number of days that you have in the trip itinerary. So if it was Japan, it would be by 11 days, and yeah, it just automatically calculates it for you. So onto the spend log. Okay, so the next tab is the spend log. And this is a tab that basically you can put absolutely everything you spend on the entire trip, whether that's before you set off on the trip. That might be pre-booking flights, hotels, maybe even buying rucksacks or accessories for the trip. Everything can go on there, as well as your daily spend when you're actually on the trip. Really simple spreadsheet to fill out. Simply put the date, the description of what the item is, how you've paid for it, the country, location, drop down of where the category is, whether it's a hotel, flight, etc. Different country currencies. You put the actual amount spent in that currency, and then you would convert that to your home currency, which in my case is, of course, Canadian dollars. But you can use this for any currency at all. And the information that comes out of this sheet jumps over into this spend analysis tab. And you'll notice here there's an overall spend analysis section and also a spend by country section. So the good thing about this is you can see at a glance, what your budget is, which is driven from your budget sections in each of these tabs, what you've spent to date and how much you have left. You can see what you've spent across the different categories throughout all countries, which, once you get to the end of your trip, it's going to be a lot more interesting information that you can really break down. And then by country, there's a drop down over on the right hand side where you can choose any of the countries from your country selector. Choose Japan. It's going to pull through the $1,000 that I have on the spend log here for Japan food. If I change this to 0.9, the exchange rate was different. It's going to adjust and it's going to flow through into this. So just another tool really to understand your spend, whether that's as a budgetary sort of, a way of budgeting, or whether it's a way of actually tracking your spend when you're on the road. I've spent already over my budget in Japan. I only had 3,900. I've spent this much, and I'm 2 days in. It tells you that you need to maybe adjust your budget, or you need to try and cut back on your spending. So just to go through the last couple of tabs here, we've got the flight summary sheet and the hotel summary sheet. These are basically printable sheets that we printed out with just information on there, kind of showing, random booking references, airlines, timings, and dates and locations. And of course, you can add in any other information that you want. And kind of the same here with hotels. We have the address of the hotel, contacts, things that we've either booked or requested, and of course the dates and times and all of that information. We printed this out. It was really useful to have in a ring binder that we carried with us. If we need to know quickly, how do we get to this hotel? What's the number? What's the email address? All of the information can be in this contact. One last final tab, which really is a bit separate to most of the other ones, but it's itinerary ideas and things to see, food and drink and accommodation in each city. This is probably more of a planning tool than maybe an active traveling tool. But just as an example, you might be looking at Tokyo, and you might say, I want to see the Tokyo Sky Tree. I want to see Team Lab Planets. I want to go out for sushi, and I'm going to stay at Prince Sakura Hotel. And you can just start putting in ideas as you're planning. As an example, we were considering going to Philippines, and when we filled this out, we had a number of places like Palawan that we wanted to go to that we ultimately didn't go to, but we planned out what we could see, looked at places to eat, accommodation, and when we got back to our kind of itinerary sheet, we realized that really it didn't quite work. But it's a good way of planning what you would like to do in different places to kind of decide where you want to go. And the final sheet is a to-do list. Now, very, very handy in the run-up to leaving. It could be apply for passports, I don't know, mow the grass, whatever it is. You can put in a specific date it has to be done by. And then when it's done, if you tick it, it will automatically take it out. So we had this for all of the various things that we needed to do before we set off. We actually have a blog post dedicated specifically to what needs to be done, how far in advance. Check our website for that one. But just another tab that you can add as much or as little information as you want. But we found this really handy. So that's it. Really hope you found this useful. I hope that you might be able to use this spreadsheet. As I mentioned before, go to our website, which is 100daysaway.com, and you'll find in the resources section a link to this website and to this Google Sheet, where you can go in and you can make a copy yourself and start using the sheet. So thank you for listening, and catch you next time.